Hello everyone and welcome to our today's session on Azure App Service. Do you know friends that Azure App Service is a one kind of a cloud service that allows you to quickly and easily create enterprise ready web and mobile apps for any platform or device and deploy them on a scalable and reliable cloud infrastructure. Now before we discuss our today's agenda, do not forget to hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon. So first we are going to discuss about the plan, the pricing tier. Moving ahead, we are going to discuss about set of features. Then we are going to discuss about website, associate and plans. Then we are going to discuss about Azure Learning Web App. And at the end, we are going to have a good hands-on.
So what I have done is before what we are doing is we talked about basics of cloud computing. Then what we started with our fast service. So the fast service, what we are talking about is app service. Okay. So this is our app service. So we said app service consists of two things. One is plan, and finally something is a deployable method, which is a website or somebody say some terminology around it as an app service. Okay. So now we created a plan. So inside a plan, we have a pricing tier. So every plan directly map to a specific pricing tier. Depending on each pricing tier, you have set of features. Okay. Now, website is again a resource in app service itself or in Azure itself. What we created is we created a website inside Azure. Then we associated that website to a app service plan. I can say like we associated this to a app service plan. Now, uh, if you remember it correctly, so once we associated it, what we were seeing the default page, what Azure gives us, the welcome page, right? So we wanted to host our own website as part of this app service plan. So for that, what we did, we created a website in ASP.NET, and this website, my bad, okay, this website we created runtime in ASP.NET, but this website can also be created on the technologies that is supported by Azure itself. This is the website runtime. So what are the technologies supported? Java, PHP, Node, Python, Ruby, if I remember it correctly, and these are the technologies. So you can basically create a web app in any of these languages. We happen to create it in ASP.NET, but you can also create it in these languages as well and deploy your web app to the website. That in turn is associated with a plan, and that also inherits the features from the pricing tier what you are in. Okay, this is all what we did till now. All right, so we'll move ahead. Okay, so the next set of feature in an app service or the website, what we're gonna see is the configuration. So I would try to relate it with, let's say we are deploying our web app to a production website or a production server. Okay, so inside the production server, what we can do, how we can basically get our configs, what are our options? So we can get our config from environment variable of the production server where the application is running, or we can write our own web app config file from where we can read that configuration from. So depending on the programming language, each programming language has their own set of retrieving the app config files. Like ASP.NET Core has appsetting.json. Okay, I'm sure Java, PHP, Node, they have their own set of setting file by which you can get your configuration from. So this is a great way. This works, and this is a great way as well. Along with that, Azure also provides you to create your configurations right inside the app service plan itself. And behind the scene, what Azure is gonna do, Azure is gonna create environment variables in the server where he is gonna host this, or Azure is gonna host this website. So what I mean by that is, so let's create a application settings. So application settings, something like connection string. So these are the details what we generally store inside a config file, right? So let's say connection string and value, I can give any value. I'll just copy it. But in a real world scenario, this can be a write connection string of your database. Call this as a DB connection string. Okay, now I'll just add this configuration. So now this configuration has been added. So it also has an option to, this is just a logical separation. Internally, it also creates, if you are creating a connection string details under this section. So this is just a logical separation. Behind the scene, it also creates a environment variable as well. So how things work doesn't change whether you are creating with inside application settings or connection string, but it just basically gives you a another bucket where you can add different settings for management perspective. So you can add your connection strings. We might have moved this connection string in here, and you can add like configuration related to your applications on this section. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, if you go to the next tab, that is the general settings tab. So there will be a scenario where you might have created a web app with a different runtime and you want to change it. So that this is where you can do this. This is where you get to see. So if you're created in .NET, this is the option what gives you Python, PHP, and Java. So you can change it to any of these runtimes. And now it's basically saying what version of the .NET you are using. Then platform and FTP state, what is the HTTP version, and whether you are using the WebSockets or not. So right now what we have seen in the HTTP protocol. So if you are gonna use the WSS protocol or the WebSocket protocol for more real-time responses, then you need to switch it, turn it on. Something like you can think of it as like think like a booking management system, right? Or a point of sale which a restaurant is working on, something like a food delivery app. They are giving you a point of sale to each restaurant. So every time there is a order inside the system, they don't have to refresh the page. That should appear on your screen, right? So that is where the WebSockets are important. So WebSockets basically has an ability where the server can also push the response to the clients as well, right? So if you are in building that kind of applications, you need to turn it on. So next is always on. So what basically this does is, so Azure has a functionality where it says like, let's say for a period of 30 minutes, the number I have to verify one more time, 20 minutes or 30 minutes. If your application does not get a single request, Azure will automatically turn it off. So if you don't want Azure to turn it off in for 20 minutes of ideal time, then you need to select it as a always on, as on. If you are selecting this value as off, so your web application will be stopped if for 20 minutes there is no request that has been received for your application. Okay, so ARR affinity is basically related to your cookies. So whether you want to, you are storing the data in cookies or not. So that's basically improve in terms of statelessness of your app. So this is basically if you want to do remote debugging or if you want client certificate mode. So certificates we'll be talking about in great detail. Next tab in this you see is the default documents. So what this default document says is, so Azure has basically um, added set of documents as part of this default documents. That means this is my first page. I'm saying whenever I'm deploying my application, either I will have a index.html page, which will be my first page to the deployed set of binaries what I have. Or if you see a .NET application, I may have a default.aspx page, default.aspx page. If it is a PHP, then might be index.php. So if you have a different set of startup page or different startup page, you can add that document here so that every time your application starts, Azure would be able to link up to that document. So if you remember, when we have not deployed our ASP.NET application to this web app, we are seeing a page, default Azure page. That was nothing but hosting start.html page. Okay, this is where you basically manage the default document. Then comes the path mapping. What is this path mapping does is, it's basically says where is the root folder for my applications. So right now it's basically saying it points to site www root. That means wherever this application is hosted, inside that server, I would have a folder which starts from site, and inside the site, I would have a www root folder. That will be considered as my root folder for this application. So if you want a different virtual directory to be added, you can add it over here. So this is basically if you are creating any HTTP handlers to be in, I mean, this is more of a .NET concept, I would say, or a IIS concept, where a request is coming and before it reaches to the server, you can write custom handlers or custom HTTP module or custom HTTP handlers. So that handler mapping, you can do it over here. Okay, so with this, I will save this data. Now our objective is, now I have this data over here, but how do I access it inside my application? Okay, so that's basically on the configuration. So now our objective is this connection string. We want to access it inside Visual Studio. Okay, so how can we do that? So we will use the same principle what I just explained. Like this is my, let's go to Solution Explorer. And what I want is, okay, I want like this configuration item to be accessed, right? Okay, let's go to controller. Okay, before I write any code against change, let me explain a bit. People who are not from .NET background. So if you look at in .NET Core, how Microsoft is basically creating this website. So it's basically a console application. So console application means, so it basically starts from void main method. This is true for most of the programming languages. So from the void main, it basically starts, it creates a host builder object. And finally, it's basically maps to a startup object or startup class. So it's basically saying, go ahead and use this as my startup class project. And inside the startup, it has two methods. One is called configure services and one is configure. These two methods, the .NET runtime basically calls these two methods. Okay, so you will not see in the uh, set of code what we have, there is nowhere you will see that is who is calling this service. But if I add a breakpoint over here, you will see this breakpoint is being hit. So this is the .NET runtime which is calling this. And the reason for this two method is, these two method basically, so .NET Core comes by default with dependency injection. What does that mean is like, you can inject all your services that is needed for your applications right in this method, configure services method. Okay, and this is also again your another method which gets called by the runtime, and this basically takes care of your middlewares or how the application flow will be. Something like, let's say first request comes in, so it has to go start from line number 32 and it goes to a sequential route and it ends in line number 54. When the response comes back, it has to go in a reverse order. Like it starts from line number 54 and it has to again execute all these middlewares. And finally, once all these middleware are satisfied, then it will give you back a response. That is how this has been created. Now, the dependency injection engine actually makes it pretty easy for accessing the configurations. So if you look at, this is where they are injecting the configuration object. So if I add a breakpoint over here and I'll try to run this. Yeah, so if you see, this is where the configuration, and the configuration is already you are getting it from, you see the multiple providers you have, right? So one of the provider, if you look at, is environment variable. This is what I was talking about earlier. Now, when we create an entry inside the Azure portal, right? So that will be added as an environment variable. So now using this configuration object, if you try to access that key, you would be able to get that key. I mean, this configuration already has that environment variable as a provider. Now you can access that from the environment variable as well. So let's try that. What I mean by that, I'll just copy this and I'll go to controller. So inside the controller method, I'll not talk about how dependency injection works, but think like, let's say this object is being initialized every time I'm adding it in a constructor, right? Let's say whenever this home controller is being invoked, it will first initialize the iLogger, whatever there is in the constructor, right? So let me bring in the new, necessary packages. As I was saying, it will first initialize the logger, then it will initialize the configuration. That is the role of the dependency injection container, what is already pre-built into ASP.NET Core. And if you look at some other programming language, every programming language has their set of libraries which provide the dependency injection. Dependency injection is a concept which is true for all the programming language, not only for .NET, right? It's happened to be like it's already pre-built. I think Java must have a package for this as well. Okay, so now I have configuration access over here. So what I'll do is this dot, that's a configuration. Now I have access to the configuration inside my controller. And what I want to do is, so the first page what is being rendered is this index page, right? In this index page, I want to basically try to access this configuration object, and configuration has a provider from environment variable. So I will say, like, let's say variable connection string. I'm trying to access the connection string. Connection string is present in this configuration object. Configuration has already a provider as environment variable. Let me copy the key name. So the key name is a DB connection string. Okay, so I'm just passing out here. So what will happen, let's say if your programming language does not support it. So you just have to find out a way how to read data from a environment variable. If you find that way, you would be able to access that variable. This is what internally it does. When I write this statement, it basically goes to the environment variable provider, gets this data, which is written in environment variable, and write it over here. Okay, so what I will do is I will basically, so .NET has a way to basically transfer data from your controller to view. So this is what I'm doing. So it has a method called viewBag property. ViewBag dot, let's say text. I'll just add this connection string. And finally, I hope everybody is following. This is just a MVC project where this is my controller. So the flow would be whatever path I'm going, it's gonna go first to the home page. I mean the controller. Then it's gonna go to the index page, index method. Like if I'm going, the path is localhost home/index. So it will basically look for the home controller. Then the action method. Action method is index. So inside this, it's finally going to the view. Now view, I need to just display this guy, viewBag.text. So let's go to the view. So view, there will be a view which is named similar to index.html. So this is my view. So I'll just see. I'll add, let's say it's 4. And I'll see the connection string is. Okay. And I can simply say, let's say this, and viewBag dot, my property name is text. All right, so I'm done. So this should display me the what is there in my basically in my configurations, right? So let's deploy this and see if it is working as expected. Let's click on publish, and I'm gonna use the web deploy one, and let's publish this. Okay, so you can see the name, it still says Kudu services. Okay, so this part of now, but these things has not been changed yet. So it still says Kudu services, Kudu. Okay, so now if you look at, now we were saying like we have deployed our app, right, where our binaries is in. So this basically gives you an access to, if you go to debug console. So this basically gives you two kind of modes. Either you can go for a command line mode or you can go for a PowerShell mode. So let's say I'm going for PowerShell. So you can actually see what all processes that is running inside my server. So if you are a system admin and you have a good knowledge of PowerShell, how this works, I have a very basic knowledge. So I'll just say, like, let's say, get me all the services, what is running on site inside my, uh, inside my VM. It's not get services. I was looking for get processes. Yeah. So what are the different process that is running? Yeah, so you can now see on this VM, I just started PowerShell, right? Apart from that, if anybody are familiar with IIS, which is the web server on which your application is being hosted inside Azure, that internally uses a W3 WP process. So you can see these are the instances what is actually running inside that VM. So you have access to the VM using this PowerShell script, and you can basically see what is the consumption, CPU consumption, and how is your VM is basically performing. And the second more important thing from a application developer and an application owner perspective. So let's say I go to uh, PowerShell also give me this file structure. Okay, so that's both are same only the file structure. Even if I goes to CMD or PowerShell, this gives me this folder structures, right? So if you remember this path mapping what we had in our configuration section. So let me go to configuration. Yeah, so if you look at the path mapping, this is saying like my root path is inside site/www root, right? So now let's map it to here. So now I have a site folder. So inside the site, you see the www root. So to my web server, I'm saying all my dependencies, or this is my root path. This is where all my files are present. So you can see all our binaries, what we have pushed from Visual Studio. These are now part of this folder. Okay, and this is my app setting file, and this file was present by default when we create the web app. And right now the default.aspx is part of our one of these DLLs. Okay, now what I want to do is, okay, so this is a very handy tool. Let's say there is a exception in our application and we want to handle it. How we can do that, right? So what I will do is I'll go to, let's say, home controller, and knowingly we will throw a exception. Let's say whenever we are going to privacy page, let's throw one exception here. I'll say throw new exception. So let's say something went wrong. Okay, so this exception might come from n number of region. Your database server is down, or the API what you are calling that is not responding in a timely fashion. There's some kind of data issue, that is why your application is breaking, or there is a miss in the application logic itself. Due to any reason, this exception may come. So we knowingly throwing this exception whenever there is a somebody tries to access this. Now let's go ahead and deploy this one more time. Right, this is what we are throwing. Okay, so now how I can find out what is happening. Okay, so let's go to now the Kudu control. So inside the Kudu control, let's go to web config. Now this is the web config. Okay, before I do that, you can see like Kudu control has these options. These are self-explanatory only. You can delete this file, you can edit this file, you can download this file. You have an option to create new folders and new files as well here, right inside the portal itself. Okay, so now let's go ahead and edit this web config. And what I want is I want to enable the logging. Let's say std log enable to true. And if you look at, it's basically writing the logs to this file, home log files std out, right? So let's go ahead and save this. Okay, so I'm saying home log files. I'm expecting a file here. Okay, so okay, so now let's go ahead and run it one more time. So let's go ahead here, home and privacy. So if I go back to Kudu control, okay, let's refresh this. Log files. Yes, you can see now there is a file called std out with the date timestamp. .log file has been created. Now go ahead and view this file. So if you view this file, this has a complete stack trace of what actually happened inside your application. Okay, so if you look at, this is what we are sending, something went wrong. And if I look carefully, you will see like this went to AZ website controller's home controller. Inside the home controller, there is a method called privacy. Inside the privacy, it's basically saying line number 33, we have an error, right? So let's go to line number 33 if it is matching. So if I go to, let's say, Solution Explorer, home controller, and I go to, let's say, line number 33, this is exactly the line where we got the exception. Okay, so this is how you can troubleshoot as well. But now you might be thinking, why would I go for that purpose? I might have my own custom logging in place. So I can go to my logging provider or where I am storing my logging. I can check all these values where it actually happened. And I can also write all these tag trace, what Azure is giving me. I can write all these tag trace and I can debug by my own. But what happens if before your logging application even handles that, I mean, that gets integrated to your application? Before that, if there is an exception, something like you have a CI/CD pipeline, and inside the CI/CD pipeline, there is a deployment happened, and after the deployment, it's blank, like nothing is happening, your application is breaking, and you are not able to figure out what happened, and there is nothing inside your logging, because your logging where you are actually injecting the logging to your application, that line never executed, so your logger is not available there yet. So that is when this will be pretty handy. So you can just come over here and this will give you a exact details where actually your application has broken. Okay, so I would say, like, only if you are an advanced user, go to here, because uh, once you do that, you should always turn the configuration off. Otherwise, it's gonna keep on adding to the log files, and you will run out of the memory what Azure is giving you. Okay, so we'll do that. So now if I go to, let's say, home, then site www root. Now inside this is my web config. I'm gonna turn it off. So I don't want my log to be available right now. Right, so that's basically how you can troubleshoot some of the issues. Now let's look at the environment variables, what we have been talking about, right? So if you go to environment, now we said, like, when we are adding this inside the configuration, it creates that environment variable, right? So if I go to my web app, let's get rid of this. If I go to configuration, this is what we said, right? So we need to prove that key actually it created that environment variable. So Kudu has access to all your environment variables. So if you look at, there is a section called server variables. Now let me try to search it, not the server variable. Let me do a control F. These are all the environment variable that is there on the system. These are all environment variables. Let's go ahead and search it with DB connection string. You can see there is a DB connection strings present. This is the value. Okay, so this added in here and as a environment variable, and from there it is basically taking it. So this is the only thing that we added. You can see what are the different things Azure is also added to make these things works. Okay, so we talked about configurations. So next thing is authentication and authorization. So this has its own module. So we'll be talking about that in a great detail, how you can configure authentication and authorization. So I'll just talk about what app service authentication is, but I'm sure in most of the cases you will not be using app service authentication. So in production scenarios, authentication can go like really the scope of the authentication can really go wide. So what this basically does is, so every web application you deploy to Azure that runs on a process what we have just seen in Kudu, which is W3 WP process, right? So when you enable an app service authentication, so you have this much of options, like whether you can you are allowing anonymous request, or you want to configure with Azure Active Directory, or these are the public providers like Microsoft, Facebook, Google, and Twitter, or you are using any of their login credentials, right? So if you are enabling this, what happens is, right? So let's say you make a request to your website.com, right? Website.com. Now it reaches to the application server. Now before it goes to actually your pages, it hits your service W3 WP service. So on this service, your app service authentication has a layer which basically gives you a login screen. So it identifies that you are not authenticated and it navigates you back to the login screen. This login screen now accepts all these providers, what we have seen. Azure Active Directory, Microsoft, and all these public providers as well. Okay, so once you are authenticated, then you have access to website.com. But with app service authentication, what you cannot do, let's say you want a role-based authorization. Okay, so let's say I'm an admin, I have access to XYZ screens, and I'm a reader, I should access to ABC screens. That thing you will not be able to do with app service authentication. Second thing, what you cannot do is, what you are creating is a complete authentication layer. So if you have, let's say, 3 screens which needed say anonymous access, that also you have restriction to. Now the complete website you are saying that's an authenticated website. You need a login before you access it. So if you want that level of authorization or management, so that is when the custom authentication and authorization will come to the picture, which we will be talking about in a authentication authorization model. Okay, so this is just a simple authentication authorization scenarios where you have a login screen, you access, you give your credentials. Once you are done, it just navigates you back to the web page. That's all it does. It out of the box, no code required to configure this. Not sure what is coming over here. Okay, the next thing is identity. So this section, this identity section, you basically will see in most of the services. So this is something what we call it as a managed identity, which is kind of a best practice while your services are within Azure. Something like, let's say, this is a web app and this web app talks to a SQL server, which is also inside Azure. That is where identity will create a bridge between them. So it has its own section. We'll talk about that. Okay, so now we are almost end of our session. So I'll just open it for questions if you have anything. All right, guys, let's see you guys. We are well past our time.
Just a quick info, guys. If you want to make a career in cloud computing, then Intellipaat provides an advanced certification on cloud and DevOps by IIT Madras. This course is taught by industry experts and IIT Madras faculty. This course is designed to upskill and land your dream job.